Well, let me start by bragging about you a little bit.
Thank you.
Because I want people to know who aren't entirely familiar that you've just won more Grammy Awards than any other engineer or mixer. The first to win both the Grammy and Latin Grammy for Album of the Year. You worked with everyone from Henry Mancini to Paul McCartney, who said in your introduction, "The various techniques that Al uses are a mystery to me, and it's such a joy to be working with someone who understands this magical process." In 2005, you won 5 Grammys.
Wow.
Ray Charles Genius Loves Company, an Album of the Year. You're in the Tech Awards Hall of Fame. The Grammy Trustees Lifetime Achievement Award on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So if you've ever wondered what goes into the creation of some of the best music ever recorded, your new book, On the Record, is a really extraordinary combination of memoir and autobiography and tech manual
Oh, thanks,
for
Shadoe.
aspiring studio engineers. And yet, it was a humble beginning. So tell us about it. It was, at Apex Recording Studio, the Steinway Building, and Uncle Harry. Tell us about how all that started.
Wow. When I was a kid, we lived in Brooklyn, and my Uncle Harry Smith, his real name was Schmitt, but he changed it because there was a lot of anti-German back then, before the war and all that stuff going on. So he was Harry Smith, and he had a recording studio. So back then, parents let their kids do these things. And my mom, when I was 8, let me go on a subway by myself and go to Manhattan. It was a dime. She'd give me 20 cents, 10 cents to get there, and 10 cents to get back home. And I would go over to his studio and just hang out, clean patch cords and set up chairs for sessions.
So they put you to work. You had a kind of a job.
Yeah. And, I remember making all the musicians take their shoes off so you wouldn't hear the stomping. And soloists getting up and walking to the microphone. So it was just, he had a beautiful apartment on Riverside Drive over the East River. He had a convertible. He took me to the hockey games. He took me to Madison Square Garden to the fights. He was my uncle and my godfather. He didn't have any children. And he was everything I wanted to be. We were so poor, we were lucky we had enough to eat half the time. And he was just, he had a roll of money. And my father was making $17.50 a week back then. When I left him on Sunday, he would give me a $20 bill, which I would take and give to my mom when I got home. And he would give it to me because he knew my father was too proud to ever take a handout.
Yeah.
So that's the way. And every time I went there, every weekend, I got that $20 bill and gave it to my mom.
That's amazing. And then there was the pinnacle moment of Mr. Mercer, the Mr. Mercer story.
Oh, yeah, that came later. That came, I got out of the Navy when I was 19, and my uncle got me a job at Apex Recording Studios. His best friend owned the place. So I get to work there, and first day I'm there 9 in the morning, and the boss, the owner, takes me in and introduces me to Tommy Dowd and a German engineer who wore a monocle, and I believe he clicked his heels every time he'd bow. It was kind of funny, but Tommy Dowd and I just hit it off.
Yeah, he was like a mentor.
He was my mentor for almost 8 years. I've learned so much.
What did he teach you?
He taught me everything about microphone techniques, what microphones work on what instruments, how to set up, and how back then we only had like 6 or 8 inputs in the console, so you had to double up on things a lot, like upright bass and acoustic guitar. So you had to be able to put the microphone in a place that captured both, So all that I learned. The way he handled himself with musicians. He would go out, and if he didn't know the musician, he'd introduce himself, and they'd start chatting, and just talk. He made himself, really made the musician feel comfortable with him. So, these are all things I was.
And you carried he gave you a notebook.
He bought me a notebook like kids have in school, and he said, "I want you to, when you see me doing sessions, draw the setup and what microphones are where." And he said it'll come in handy someday. So I did, and every time he would, I'd have a little page and draw the setup and what mics and so forth. So I was there 3 months, and they said, "Okay, we're going to let you come in on Saturday on your own and do." Every Saturday we did what we call little demo things. People would come in and do one-on-one little recordings. So I had 3 appointments. And 10 o'clock, the guy comes in and he plays Happy Birthday to his daughter, and we record it on an acetate. I give it to him, he gives me $15, and he's gone. 12 o'clock, another guy comes in, he plays piano and sings a song that he had just written. So I give him the acetate, and he gives me the $15. So 2 o'clock, I'm waiting for Mr. Mercer to show up. And the elevator doors open up, and all these musicians start coming out. They want to know where the studio is. And I said, well, the studio's right there, but there's a mistake. No, Mercer Records, Mercer Ellington, Duke Ellington's son, the Duke Ellington band. I said, oh, no, this is a big mistake. That's not going to happen.
So you were nervous? Were you like Albert Brooks in broadcast news?
I was, yeah, exactly like that. So anyway, I tried to call Tommy. I couldn't reach him. I tried to call my boss. I couldn't reach him. So I remembered the book. And I got this big band set up that Tommy had done, and I went out, and we only had 8 inputs, so I only could put up 8 microphones, so it didn't take that long. And I got that, and the musicians were sitting down, getting comfortable and warming up and tuning and so forth. And Duke walks in, Duke Ellington. And Billy Strayhorn was on the piano, and I was a bebopper, so these guys were my idols. It's like Joe DiMaggio and Babe Ruth to me,
Right.
It was, so I'm just, my jaw is down in my chest. And I said, Mr. Ellington, this is a huge mistake. I'm not qualified to do this. And he said, what do you mean, son? I said, I'm just not qualified to do this. I'm only qualified to do little things. He said, well, the band's out there and everybody looks comfortable. And so he said, let's do it.
So how old were you?
I was 19. So we did. We did 4 songs in 3 hours, and he kept patting me on the leg. He kept reaching over and patting me on the leg, saying, "We're going to get through this, son. Just relax. We're going to get through this." I think he thought I was going to faint any minute.
Yeah, wet with sweat.
And it was very close. I think if I knew the night before, I probably would have called in sick, because I would have been so frightened. But the fact that I got thrown into it helped me. It gave me confidence that, wow, I did that.
Sure.
I did the Duke Ellington band. How amazing is that?
Amazing.
Couldn't wait to get home and tell my friends in the bar.
Yeah. And did anyone believe you? You made that up.
Of course not.
Yeah, nobody works with Duke Ellington. You also talked about Art Tatum coming in.
Well, that was when I was real young, when I was at my uncle's studio. He had an office upstairs in the building, and he would come down on a Saturday if my uncle wasn't recording and work out on a beautiful grand piano that he had. And he would grab me and bring me over and sit me next to him on a stool, take my hand, and show me little boogie-woogie licks on the piano and stuff. And yeah, it was great. He was really, to me, he was just a sweet man who could play the piano. I had no idea who he was.
Do you have favorite boogie-woogie or piano or New Orleans type musicians? James Booker, Dr. John, Professor Longhand.
Yeah, Mac Rabenak, Dr. John, those guys. Yeah, I got to work with a lot of those guys too.
Nice.
But it was great, and Les Paul was my uncle's best friend. And they worked on things together all the time, and they were together all the time. And they would take me to bars and take me to restaurants, and we always got great tables at restaurants. And I mean, it was just, as a kid growing up, I felt like I was in the movies. That this was an unreal life to me, because we didn't have that. We never went out, couldn't afford to go out. My sister and my mom and dad. So yeah, it was an unreal world, and it was one I wanted to be in all my life.
Yeah.
So I don't think I ever wanted to do anything but be a recording engineer. I think that was from the time I was 8 or 9 years old.
Now, you tell a great story about having an ear accident and how it affected you when you went in to the service. Having to fake listening or hearing for the rifle range and all that.
Oh, no, that was an eye accident.
Oh, an eye. That's right.
Yeah. Well, what happened was at 13, I stopped going to my uncle's studio because I started hanging out with a gang of guys, and we were getting in all kinds of trouble. And so on my 17th birthday, I enlisted in the Navy. My parents signed for me to go in. On my birthday, I signed up. But if I didn't, I was going to wind up in prison or something because, we were doing crazy stuff. And so I got away from that.
Did you have a pompadour at the time?
Pardon me?
Did you have a pompadour?
Yeah, I had the pompadour and the duck's
and the suit. Did you walk with a sway?
I had the suit pants and peg pants, and I had all that stuff.
Are there pictures?
Huh?
Are there pictures?
I don't know if there are pictures. I don't think there are any left.
That.
Back then, people didn't have iPhones or or a lot of cameras were around. Brownies were it. So anyway, I went in the Navy and I was stationed. I went to Great Lakes. And then when I came out, I got stationed in Washington, D.C. at the Communications Center down there. And I spent the rest of my time in the Navy in Washington, D.C. And it was great for a 17-year-old kid because there were like 7 girls to every guy down in the town, And so I was having a great time. And I got out and I was going to go back to school and stay away from the guys I originally hung out with. And my uncle called and said a friend of his had the studio and I of course jumped at it.
And you had to record everything on acetates.
Back then,
there was this thing about World War II. There was
well, yeah, during when I was a kid, and he would cut on acetate. The base was glass, not aluminum, because aluminum went to the war effort. So the base was glass, and you had to be very careful. If you just tapped them, they would break. So and he didn't have suction back then to suck up the chips. He had a mink brush that was over the thing, and my job would be as it fill up on the brush, I would have to pick it up and put it in a can because it was highly flammable. So that was one of my jobs. I had to be real careful. I didn't touch anything, to bump it or whatever. He told me when I was young, you have to be really careful. You have to treat all this like it's a Swiss watch, and you're the watchmaker. And if you take good care of it, it'll take good care of you. And I never forgot that.
So I would imagine that you would have to find it would influence your creativity, the limitations of having to record everything and make it perfect right then. And isn't there a thing that you talked about where you had 2 acetates and you did an early kind of mixing?
Tommy Dowd and I. Well, we used to do all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah, we had, there was a take 2 that they liked on one acetate and take 3 on another acetate that they liked, but they wanted to keep the first half of take 2 and use the second half of take 3. So we had 2 turntables there with faders on the turntables. So Tommy and I would
You have to time it exactly right.
Yeah, and then he would fade down as I would fade up, and we would ruin more stuff because we were going to another disc, and we got it right maybe 1/10 of 1% of the time, The rest of the time it was just a mess. So our boss got a little pissed off because we were wasting all these acetates trying to do this for the guy.
Were there any memorable records that came out of that process that you might remember, something we'd know?
Yeah, there was a lot of... the first hit record I made was with the Coasters called Don't You Know, the Clovers, called Don't You Know I Love You So.
Yeah.
and it was written by Ahmet Ertegun, but the producer was Herb Abramson, who was Ahmet's partner. And he came in on a Saturday, and we did 2 songs. We did that one and the old standard Skylark. And it was a major hit. It was back then they were called race records.
Right.
Yeah,
God.
and so it was a major race record hit. So yeah, and that was like 3 weeks after I did the Duke Ellington record. So now I had Duke Ellington and
you're a
the
little
hit record on top of it. So I was feeling pretty good.
I would think. Life is good. You're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I was moving along. People were asking for me.
Did having to create things in a mono studio with 6 inputs and 6 mics and having to make everything perfect, I wondered if you looked forward to stereo or if it made you nervous or like you'd be afraid it might lose its soul.
No, we didn't think anything about stereo at first when I started. That only started to come about in the mid-50s, like 55, after I'd been in the business for 5 years and so forth. And then when I started, when Tommy and I both moved to another studio called Fulton Recording Studios, I was doing a lot of jazz and for World Pacific. Dick Bach was the guy's name, and I was doing Chet Baker and Jerry Mulligan and all these big jazz artists. And what we would do is we'd set up, and we only listened mono, but we'd put a stereo mic up and record to another tape machine. We never even checked it. Once in a while we'd check it to make sure it was recording, but it was like a step system. And but the record companies were wise to stereo was going to come about, and so that was it. We were doing everything.
So
we
did
were
you do
concentrating
everything in mono and stereo?
Mono and stereo,
like as a backup for the
yeah,
future.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. And when you did that, were you putting the drums over on one side and the bass on another side, and doing any of that kind of stuff that came later?
No, that came later on. When it first came about, we concentrated on mono and had everybody set up that way, and then we recorded to another track for the stereo.
I see.
And
so just it kind of expanded the dynamics of the room.
Yeah.
So if you were to choose 3 mics to cover your every need, what would they be?
Wow. Today? You
Yeah.
mean? Wow.
I'm going to bounce around a little bit.
No, they would be Neumann mics. I think a 47, which I love on the voice.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually my first.
I have a problem with the 47 if I talk very closely and about like this. It's crunchy and like glass.
Wow.
But every time I've ever pushed it with a lot more presence, it always flattened out and took away the bass. And I don't know if that's because of the room or me.
Could be the room, or it could be the preamp or whatever they were using. That was Frank's mic, and that's what he used on everything. And Rosemary Clooney on all the records I did with her, that was a 47. So those would be that, and then of course another Neumann mic is a 67, a U67 that I love. That's a great mic. I use that on strings and brass and whatever. The other one, the third one, would be another Neumann mic, a fairly newer mic, an M149, and I use that on upright bass and on the piano. Mm-hmm. There's something about there's a top end to it that just is really sweet, and it just adds to the sound of the instrument.
So it pops the presence.
Yeah, and like anything else, it depends where you put the microphone. That's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, which is another thing about the acoustics of the room I wanted to ask you about, because the room noise and high-end bounce, and are there secrets to getting the perfect combination of the brightness and the dead? It's like sometimes people soften the room, put up quilts or what. I mean, for like a low-budget film shoot or doing auditions on your phone, most of the time you can hear the amateur, and they don't do anything in the wall, and it's real echoey, and it looks cheap. And no matter how good it looks on camera,
Right.
The sound is terrible. So what would you recommend?
Well, what we used to do when I first went to RCA and they were building the studios in the NBC building on Sunset and Vine, we hired a rhythm section and brought them in and set them up in different spots of the room, so we could find where the best spots were and where the best acoustics were for those things. Once we got the rhythm section down, then it was easy to get strings or brass or that in proximity to the rhythm section. But that was the most important thing, trying to get a really good drum sound. And
Yeah. So and there was also, you talked about the advice you got from somebody about putting the microphone closer to the bass drum and then how it punched up the bass.
Yeah, again, when I first started at Apex, I was recording a trio. Tiny Khan was a famous drummer back then, and he was a big heavyset guy. And it was just a trio. It was bass, drums, and piano. And so I only had 3 mics up. So he said, "Hey, kid, put a mic on the bass drum." And I said, "Oh, no, we don't do that." He said, "Go ahead. Just put a mic on the bass drum. Just add." I said, "No." He said, "Try it." I said, "Okay," I tried it. So I put a mic on the bass drum, and then when I went in and I slowly opened that microphone, I had everything else sounding great. I slowly opened that microphone, and it just added this bottom to
Thump.
Yeah, and it was just amazing.
So everybody's
from
doing
then
that.
on,
From everywhere
I
now.
was doing it all the time.
Yeah, I would think so. You have a section in your book called How to Listen. And what do you mean by that? And is it a discipline that can be learned and nurtured? What advice would you give to people?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I think it's important to listen to all kinds of music, especially if you're going to be an engineer. You want to listen to all kinds of music, so classical music, big band jazz, or whatever, and get your ears accustomed to what those things sound like. So, if you've never heard a big band and now you're recording a big band, what do? What is it supposed to sound like? You have no idea. And I think it's really important that engineers spend time listening. Music was all I listened to at home, vinyl, and we were playing, all the Woody Herman and all those things, and just learning as much about how they balance things and what things sounded better than others, and trying to find out maybe how they did the stuff that sounded better.
So did you take notes, or did you just remember?
Yeah, I took notes. I had the greatest notebook, that book that Tommy gave me, and I had a bunch of notes in it. And
have you just continued to do that throughout your career? Do you continue to write notes?
Yeah,
because it's all locked in.
When I got divorced, that book went.
No.
Gone. Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, it was
That's
terrible.
a bad
Yeah,
divorce.
I lost that in a lot of my record collection.
Really?
So yeah, it wasn't fun. But those were the,
Oh, those are the good old days. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
About speakers, what do you look for? And for people that don't have $10,000 for God speakers, what do you look for on a budget? And some have boosted mid-range, and do you want something flat, or what do you recommend?
I like something that's smooth. So it's got a good low end and a nice top end, not too crunchy or bright. JBL makes really, really nice speakers, and for a reasonable amount of money. And what I suggest to people, because nobody hears the same way, so I tell them to go, if you're going to buy speakers, go into a hi-fi shop or whatever, and have them try different speakers and pick the ones you like. The ones that are comfortable with you, that you like the sound of, because you're the one who's going to be listening to them. So, I think that's important.
Now, do you always
don't use mine because you may not like them.
Right, I see. Now, do you use 2 different sets? Do you like a little mix downs or little smaller speakers?
Yeah, sometimes. Mostly I use the old Doug Sax mastering lab speakers, and they're tannoy 10-inch driver, and then his cabinet and his crossover networks. And I've been using those for about 15 years now. And then at home, I have 2 tannoy self-powered speakers that I like, and they're a little different than what I use in the control room when I'm working. So it gives me a little different idea of what I'm doing. You know, I like what I hear here, and then if I like what I hear at home, then I know I'm safe.
I see. Now, I found that your book, in many ways, was a guide for engineers and producers and musicians, and also a memoir. Was that your goal, to try and cover both bases, to tell your story and to, give an overview of how to record vocals and French horns and strings? And
yeah, I think what happened was everybody was coming to me and saying, "Man, you got to write a book." You know, I'd be working with Phil Ramone, great storyteller and everything. And at the end of a date, he'd tell a story, then I'd tell a story, and we'd spend a couple hours after the session just telling stories. And the next thing you know, there'd be 20 people just listening to the stories. So, so everybody kept saying, "When are you going to write a book, Al? When are you going to write a book?" And finally, Maureen Droney, who was the head of the P&E wing at the Grammys, came and said, it's about time you did this, and I'll make it easy for you, and so forth. So she would come over to my house every Saturday, turn on a tape recorder, and we'd talk. And all this came about from those talks. It took about 3 years to get it done.
do you think mixing is the most exciting part of the process? Like they say in film, editing is where the magic happens. Yeah. Or is there a particular part of the discipline that you prefer?
Well, I prefer recording live. I mean, that's my favorite thing. And while I'm recording, I'm already mixing. I'm panning things the way I want to see it in the mix, and I'm moving faders and writing gain on a vocal, and so yeah, that's my favorite thing. I love being around musicians. I go out, we talk, how are the kids, how are this, what's going on. Some of them are runners, and you've been running any races, and stuff like that. And so we become friends, and I.
You work with the Wrecking Crew a lot.
Oh yeah, a lot.
So
yeah,
those are legends.
Yeah, they were.
Maybe they created the sound of everything we know in life.
Yeah. They were the greatest. They probably made 90% of all the records that came out in, 60s, 70s? You would know that.
Oh, being
a top jock in the world at that time.
Top jock. So do you have any, particular... They just came in, they knew what they were doing, and you could just trust them, I would imagine.
Yeah, they'd come in, I'd get a little, if the bass player come in, I'd have him play a little and get a sound, or the drummer, and do that, and then we'd just chat, go in, and, they'd come in. I always try to get the musicians to come in and listen to the first take. And sometimes it would be the take that we use, but just so they could hear what I'm getting. So they can make any minor adjustments they want to make, or they can tell me, Al, I could use a little more hi-hat or whatever. And then so it's a team effort.
And along the way, you were lifelong friends with Les Paul.
Yeah.
So you worked with him numerous times through different decades, I would imagine.
Yeah, I really never got to work with him a lot. I got to, certainly from the time I was a kid, he was my Uncle Les. Yeah. And so I'd see him at functions all the time. I was getting a Tech Award, and he was there. Tommy Dowd was giving me the Tech Award in New York. And Les Paul was a curmudgeon, and he was a funny guy. And so I introduced him to my wife. And he said, "Oh, Lisa, you're much prettier than the woman he was with last night." So, that kind of stuff. And he was just a wonderful guy. He always had a smile on his face and a twinkle in his eye. One of those guys.
Is there a personality, an artist that you most learned from along the way?
boy.
Or a special experience that you most appreciated?
The artist I admired the most and throughout my whole life was Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
I don't think there was anybody like him. And to get the opportunity to record him and hang out with him, have dinner with him and stuff was just beyond my wildest dreams.
I can imagine.
And it was an amazing. But just the way he carried himself and how he talked to the musicians and, there was something very special.
He seemed to have a kind of respect for the people he worked with. And I don't know that much about him, but except for the documentaries, but
yeah,
he seemed pretty remarkable in almost every way.
Yeah, and I learned a lot from him in that way, and to have respect for the arrangers, the musicians, and everybody else around. My dad, he gave me a work ethic. He never took a day off in his life, and he always taught me to treat people the way you want to be treated, and if you do that, you'll get through life pretty well. Well, I was pretty cool until I really started juicing a little too much, and then that Mr. Hyde would show up.
You get loud and
loud,
dumb.
And boisterous, and nasty, and you want to beat up the world.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, but I'm back on the right track now.
I want to talk about that in depth in a minute, but I wanted to ask you about Sam Cooke. That must have been interesting.
He was probably one of my favorite artists to record. I made so many records with him and so many hits, and then I got promoted to being a producer at RCA, and I couldn't record anymore, and then his producers, Hugo and Luigi, left to start Avco Embassy, their own label, and Sam said, well, gee, I like Al and I get along well. Maybe he should be my producer. So I wound up producing him. And it was great. It was just, I love that guy. He was handsome. He dressed well. He always had a big smile on. He laughed a lot. He was an amazing.
And you were there at the end of his life.
Yeah, I had dinner with him the night he was killed.
Oh.
We were talking about doing the next record. We were going to do a blues album, and we had dinner at Martoni's, a favorite watering hole, and we talked about it. And then, okay, I'll be over your house on the weekend, and we'll go over material. And we were going to do that.
Wow.
And
that was
and
it.
then we were supposed to meet at PJ's, another watering hole. He never showed up. I went home. And then Lester Sill called me on the phone about 5 o'clock in the morning and said, Sam was shot. And so I'm getting ready to get dressed and, what hospital is he in and so forth. He said, no, he's dead. So it was heartbreaking.
You talk about, in your book, about capturing the sound of an artist faithfully. What do you mean by that?
What's that?
Capturing the sound of an artist faithfully.
Oh.
So that a non-engineer can understand what you're talking about.
I think, what I was talking about is to capture what the artist does, what they do best, rather than trying to make it something other than what they really do. And some people do, try to change the sound and I was just taught from the beginning, capture what they do out there. Capture that. That's your job, is to get that and put that down and say that. So,
and get the magic.
So that's really what I try to do, and capture the magic.
Now, you've worked as a producer and an engineer, and do you have a preference?
Yeah, I do. I have a preference. I prefer engineering.
Really?
And yeah, I'll tell you why. When I got promoted to be a producer at RCA, and I wound up with 11 artists and had to make albums. And back in those days, artists would put out 2 albums a year.
Yeah.
So, you could do an album in 2 or 3 days back then. And so I had Glenn Yarborough, and I had the Women Folk, and I had Hugo Montenegro, and Sam Cooke, Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah.
So I had all these artists, Eddie Fisher, and I was doing Eddie Fisher in the afternoon from 2 to 5, and then I'd go to my office and I'd meditate for an hour or two, and then I'd come back down and start with the Jefferson Airplane, 8 o'clock at night, and go till 4 in the morning. So I was getting, trying to find, back then, all the artists didn't write their own songs, and so you had to fight, deal with publishers and listen to songs and try to find songs for the artists. So I was getting 2-3 hours sleep a night, And I called my boss in New York, and I said, man, you're going to get somebody to do Eddie Fisher. I said, I can't do the Airplane. We're in the studio till 4 in the morning, and they're a wild bunch of people, having a good time. And I'm not getting much sleep. And he said to me, gee, how truck drivers do it? And I said, really? Well, get yourself a couple of truck drivers. I quit, and I turned my resignation in the next morning.
No kidding.
Yeah, and
I didn't hear that story.
In 2 weeks, and I left. So now I'm home sitting, scratching my head, wondering what the hell I'm going to do. And I get a call from the Jefferson Airplane. They wanted to give us some of the producers there. There was nobody we liked and everything. They said, okay, hire an independent guy. We'll give him points and so much to produce the album. Would you come? I said, absolutely.
Yeah.
So back then, my salary was $17,500 a year, and I could make a $5,000 bonus, depending on how well the records I produced sold. So I was making $22,500. My first royalty check with the Jefferson Airplane, one album, was $50,000.
Oh, so much better deal.
It was a much better deal. And then slowly, then I just was doing producing, and then I got into back into engineering a little, and I wound up, working with Jackson Browne, Late for the Sky, Neil Young on the beach, and so doing that. And then Tommy LaPuma was doing an album with Dave Mason, and his engineer was Bruce Botnick, the engineer who did all the Doors records. And he had to leave the thing because he had a deadline to start with the Doors. And Tommy said, you used to engineer, Al, I said, no, I don't think I could do it anymore. He said, yeah, he said, it's like riding a bike. Come on, give it a try. So I said, all right, I'll give it a try. But if it isn't working, you got to let me back out. Yeah. And he did, and so this was Alone Together with Dave Mason, and I'm mixing this record, and I'm thinking, this is really where I belong.
Yeah.
This is what I really came into the business to do. And that was it. From then on, I just started, I got more and more away from producing and more into engineering.
Well, the thing about being a great engineer is that you actually manifest the whims of the engineer who he thinks he's got this idea. Can we do this? How would we do this? And you go, oh, here's how we do it. And right. I think that's why Paul McCartney talked about your magic. Because it really is something extraordinary. A well-produced album is an amazing experience.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree. And that the reason I became a producer at RCA, I would get guys in, and we'd have a band out there, and the producer, he'd be on the phone for 3 hours. He'd be talking to his bookie or a hooker or whatever, and I'm doing all the work.
Yeah.
And that's when I said to my boss finally, I said, look, these guys they're getting all the credit and all the money, and I'm doing all the work.
Yeah, truly. So if you will indulge me a moment.
Sure.
I'm just going to, because people have no idea how many amazing artists you've worked with. And so I'll go through some lists, and if along the way an idea of a comment you'd like to make comes to your mind, just jump in. But you work with Leon Russell and Neil Young and Linda Ronstadt and Jefferson Airplane and Burt Bacharach and Disney's Winnie the Pooh. So how do you adjust to so many diverse music styles. Those are completely different disciplines.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But you learn to, I guess it's like a doctor who is a normal practitioner who tells you what to take when you have a headache, and all that
General
kind of stuff.
practitioner.
Yeah, I just you just learn. There was certain music I didn't like, like polka music and things like that. But
Frankie Yankovic, come on.
Yeah, I know.
I'm from North Dakota.
But I made it a point. I made it a point of getting okay. I don't like this music, but I'm going to get the best accordion sound they ever heard in their life. And that's what I would concentrate on.
Sure.
Getting sounds that, better than anything they'd ever had before.
Yeah. They had crunch and presence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so Josh Groban, Willie Nelson, Celine Dion, Rod Stewart, Boz Scaggs, and Al Jarreau. But don't, stop me if you...
I got a great Al Jarreau story.
Okay,
if you
tell me
want,
that one.
If you want to hear that. When I was producing, we had just got Al signed to Warner Brothers, and I'm producing his first album, We Got By. So we're in the studio and got a great rhythm section now. Everything's live and it's just going great. So we do 3 takes and it's just killer. And I say, hey guys, you got to come in and hear this now. I think we got this. So they all come in and we play it back and everybody's just loving it. In the meantime, the door to the control room opens up and this woman comes in. It was Al Jarreau's girlfriend, and they're over there talking. So after it's over, he comes up to me and he said, Al, Susan doesn't think this is a good take. I said, really? She's maybe a little slow. And I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, well, hold on. So I rewind the tape, call my home, play it over the phone. And then I turned and I said, how'd you like that? My wife said, oh, it's great. I said, my wife thinks it's great. Well, his look on his face was like, and then he burst into this smile. And the reason I did that is if I didn't nip it in the bud at that point, I was going to have to deal with her throughout the whole album. And I didn't want to get into that. So, and I was headstrong enough to know that I could.
Yeah, and you got to believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
and I didn't need Susan to help me out in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Okay,
but
so
the look on his face was amazing.
I
When
would
said,
imagine.
my wife likes it.
I love that story. Okay, Aretha Franklin, Michael Bolton,
Wow.
Luther Vandross, Queen Latifah, Gladys Knight, Chick Corea, Dave Mason, Johnny Mathis, and the Partridge Family. That's
Unbelievable.
divergent.
They're all so great. They're all just wonderful. I mean, I've had such great experiences with all those artists.
Well, let's keep going. Paul Anka, Joni Mitchell.
Paul, I love Paul. Paul and I became really good friends.
Oh, really?
And Paul's a good guy, man. He's helped me out a lot, and I like Paul.
Tony Bennett,
Yeah,
Barbra Streisand,
yeah.
the
Barbara.
who's who. Okay,
Barbara's
but
fabulous.
wait, there's more. Lionel Richie, Jackson Browne, Carly Simon, Tower of Power, Bette Midler, Barry Manilow, Dwayne Eddy, and the Astronauts. Come on.
Remember the astronauts?
I loved the Astronauts at that time. They were
I produced
wonderful.
them. I found them
in Colorado.
In Colorado,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, and that was
Amazing.
great. Skunk Baxter, do you know the guitar player? Skunk Baxter, great.
Yeah.
That's still one of his all-time favorite records.
No
He's got
kidding.
it on his phone, and every time he sees me, he plays it for me.
Oh, I'm going to have to look
Baja,
that up
the
and
one-
find
the
that
single.
again. I
Yeah.
haven't heard that in years. Jennifer Holliday, my favorite, Dr. John.
Yeah, he's my favorite.
Love him.
Mac, I did a bunch of records with Mac, but at one point I went to New Orleans for 3 weeks to work with him. Stu Levine was producing, I was engineering. And they took pictures every day, and at the end of the 3 weeks, they were looking at pictures, and every picture we're laughing. I mean, he had a language of his own. Mac is one of my all-time favorites. He came in, he had his parking ticket. He wanted to know where he could get it violated. He came in late one day and he had borrowed his ex-wife's car and got in an accident. He said it was an unavoidable collusion. Just things like that. So you're constantly laughing, and I loved his music.
We hired him on a television series I did in the '90s, and I was just in awe of him. And I realized at that moment that no matter how long I ever lived and how hard I tried, I would never be as cool as Dr. John. That language is just like pudding.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
I've never seen anybody like him.
If somebody said if you could only just go in the studio with one artist out of all of them, it would be Mac.
I'm so glad to hear that, because that's the way I would think.
I just love him.
Yeah, me too. Okay, but there's Dolly Parton and Hugo Montenegro. Hugo Montenegro, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The Brian Setzer Orchestra. Al Hirt, album. Joe Sample, Dan Hicks, Anne Margaret, Rosemary Clooney. All these artists over 7 decades?
Yeah, right.
Good Lord.
Yeah.
So, is there a case to be made that you have engineered the soundtrack to most of our lives?
I don't know. I've heard that before, and that may be true, but I'm not going to say it.
Well, thank God you've been doing it. Do you have a favorite experience of all of those sessions from people of different generations, something that really pops into your mind that you love?
Oh, I think, God, when I was a kid, I used to play hooky from school to go to the Paramount Theater to see Frank Sinatra, and he'd do 5 shows there with the Tommy Dorsey Band. So I did a magazine article, and somebody said, do you have any regrets? And I said, I have one regret. I never got to work with Frank Sinatra. So 3 weeks later, Phil Ramone calls me on the phone, and Phil and I are really good friends. And he said, what's your schedule? And we chatted for a while, and I get my book, and I said, oh, great, I'm good. And he asked me, what's your fee is? And I told him, and he kind of said, whoa, I said, that's what I get. He said, all right. And then we chatted a little more. And just before we're saying goodbye, I said, by the way, who's the artist? He said, Frank Sinatra.
Oh.
I said, Phil, if you'd have told me that in front, I would have done it for nothing. So he's smart, Alec, that he was, Phil. He said, well, if you'd asked me for more, I would have given it to you. So.
Oh, God.
So anyway, so that was it. And working, being next to Frank, standing next to him, having him put his elbow like this to me and say, where do you want me? And I said, well, Phil built this booth over here. They want you in there. And those blue eyes, and he looked at me, looked at that booth, and he looked at me and he said, I'm not going in there. Right. We had a bottle of Jack Daniels, carton of Camel cigarettes, and a bunch of Tootsie Rolls. He loved Tootsie Rolls. So I said, well, where do you want to be? And he said, how about right here, right in front of the brass section?
Wow.
So I said, fine.
And he said,
I don't want this mic. He said, I want a handheld mic. I want it like a performance. So we got a wireless handheld mic for him, and he stood right in front of the trombones and trumpets. Saxes were on the side, and the strings are all over here, and that was it.
And you found a way to make him fit in there.
Yeah, we made it work. And he did every tune. He did top to bottom, and the only time he'd stop is if the tempo wasn't right, and he'd stop and recount it off and get comfortable. It was amazing. And then we went and had dinner, and it was Phil and Pat Williams and me and Hank Catania, who was Frank's right-hand guy, a mafia guy by the name of Louis Dome. And we went to La Dolce Vita and sat around his table, and none of us said a word. It was he and the mafia guy just told stories all night. It was like, I wish I could have recorded it.
Really?
It was unbelievable.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
He told about a guy by the name of Beansy, who was a soldier in the mafia, and he had a reputation for being able to steal the hubcaps off a car while it was still moving.
That's technique.
That's technique. Yeah.
A little rollerblades or skateboard along the side. Those are quick fingers.
Yeah.
Are we losing the soul of music with overdubbing?
Oh, somewhat, I think. you lose that spontaneity when everybody's together in the room, working off one another. The guitar player plays something, the piano player hears it, he plays off that, then the guitar player hears what he played, then he'll play off that.
Sure.
The bass player will. So they work together, and we're losing that when you have a drummer in L.A. and the bass players in San Diego and the guitar players in Colorado, and they're overdubbing, so they have that one track that this guy, the drums don't move then, where if they're all in the same room, he may play something a little different depending on what everybody else is doing. So we lose that. And back when we did Breezin' with Benson, we did like 6 tunes, I think, and of the 6 tunes, 5 of them were the first take.
Amazing.
I mean, it's just, when you have that, everybody playing off one another, and we don't have that anymore.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge going forward in the future as we have more and more options and opportunity to change this and change that?
I really don't know. I like the way things sound now. I think that, Pro Tools, we're up at 192 and the quality is great, and that's good. That's a good thing. The fact that we can do things like I did a Diana Krall thing. We had 3 takes, and take 3 was the take, but she loved the piano solo in take 2. So we just, boom, put it in. It took a minute to drop it in. Now, if we had to do that on tape, we would have to mark the tape, edit the tape, take it off, put the other roll on, and put it together. It would take a half an hour.
Yeah.
So this way we did it, and it didn't stop the momentum of what was going on.
Is there anything that frustrates you or annoys you about the way things are done today, or are they just problems that have to be overcome and you deal with it?
I think one of the things that annoys me more than anything is the way they record things so loud, and the loudness wars that went on where they were trying to make CDs the louder than the next guys. Everybody was trying to beat the next guy in loudness. And I belong to a little group we called, it's called Turn It Up, and if you want it louder, just turn it up and make it louder.
Right.
So
you don't have to record it that way.
No.
At ear-piercing, ear-bleeding levels.
And it's brittle and hard on the ears.
What do you think is the most important business or career lesson that you've learned, and how has it helped you? Do you have an idea what that might be?
When you're starting out, or if you're starting to get some action on things you're doing, make sure you have a good, honest attorney. And I mean that because I can't tell you how many hundreds of thousands of dollars I've lost because I got promised deals, and then when it came time there was no promise, those kind of things, because I didn't have it down on paper.
Sure. Boy, that's a
So I think it's really important to do that.
Yeah, have yourself covered.
Yeah.
Is there a type of recording you prefer, orchestra over, a 3-piece band or pop music?
I like to record big orchestras. My favorite thing, I think, is a big band. That's my favorite thing, and that's what I grew up on.
It's exciting music.
And that's when you open the faders and that band is coming out at you, I still get goosebumps.
Sure. Yeah, I love that too. So you've had really extraordinary success almost from the beginning, and as you got bigger and more impressive and more exciting by the years. So success took its toll on you. This is where the things took a turn for the downside?
No. I've been really lucky. I'm still busy. I'm still working. Still busy. I've got a couple nice albums that are coming out. I did a Christmas album with Martina McBride and Pat Williams. That's really a cool album. I did a great record with Trisha Yearwood, who did all Frank Sinatra songs with Vince Mendoza. And I don't know if you know Vince, but an incredible arranger. That's coming out in a couple months.
Great.
So I'm still doing.
And what
I'm
about
doing.
the drugs and drinking in the studio? And where did that take you?
Yeah, that
When-
took me
when-
to
that was
a
a while
dark
ago.
place, and yeah, it was not good. And everybody was
Did it
drinking.
just snuck up on you? It's like,
Yeah, it did. It just grabbed me when
was
I
it
didn't.
mostly alcohol or?
It was alcohol, a lot of cocaine.
Yeah.
And with the airplane when I was working with them, it was acid and all this other
Of course.
stuff going on. We had a nitrous oxide tank in the
Well, it's the
studio
law.
and crazy stuff, and they were spiking people and that
God.
kind of stuff. So yeah, I woke up one morning. I was in a poker game one night at my house with a bunch of promotion men and studio owners and stuff, and we're playing and back in the drugs and drinking and all. And I pick up my cards and I look at the table, and everybody was talking at the same time. Everybody's mouth was moving at the same time, and nobody was.
Well, they had
listening
important
to,
things to say.
And I thought, I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. So the night ended. I called a friend of mine who was in AA, and I said, I'd like to go to a meeting. Let me know where your meeting is. I'd like to go, And he said, No, Al, I'll come and pick you up. He wanted to make sure
So
that
you
I
got
didn't
there right
back
now.
out, right. And he
Was it
did.
an AA meeting or a?
It was an AA meeting,
Yeah.
and it was a musicians meeting.
Oh yeah.
And it was like 50 guys there, and I knew 40 of them.
I'm sure.
And it was like old home week, and I never left.
Wow.
I got there the first night, and coffee afterwards with guys and telling stories about how they got there and the help and the handouts. The guys, here's my phone number. Call me. You got a problem for me. You wake up and call me. I'll come right over. That kind of stuff. I couldn't believe it.
I know, it's amazing.
It
isn't
is, And if everybody lived the 12 steps, what a world this would be, huh?
Truly.
It would be unbelievable.
Yeah, learning how to be of service with
Yeah,
no expectations
absolutely.
of
and
compensation.
helping, like giving back and helping others, and
It's pretty remarkable. I totally agree.
yeah.
You have the secrets of your success. You have a chapter dedicated to things like confidence. So if you don't have it, do you fake it?
Yeah,
You just act like you have
gotta-
confidence.
yeah, right.
Here, let me tell you that.
Yeah, you got to know. If you don't know what you're doing, you got to make sure people think you know what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. So they have confidence
Yeah,
in you.
you're right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So talk like you have confidence.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you're nervous.
And you had a category of respect, which I assume means being interested and curious about who the people are and what they do and the way you talk to them. I think you learned really early in life about the value of going and talking to the musicians and befriending them
Right.
and letting them know how much you appreciate them.
And the same with artists, the artists, to talk to them. And when you're putting the mic up in front of them, talk to them. And if you can see the artist is maybe a little nervous, kind of calming them down and say, hey, as long as you're comfortable, let me know whatever we can do to make you comfortable. And
Right.
I think it's important.
There's also a long section about meditation. So did you start with the Maharishi and the Beatles?
Yeah.
Or is it like a scientific method for you, or there are more spiritual aspects
It's
as
more
well?
it's spiritual thing. Paul Horn was one of the disciples of the Maharishi, and he got me into it. I was producing his records, and he got me into it. And it saved my life many, many times. Be able to sit down, even sometimes for 20 minutes,
Sure.
and just concentrate.
So is it
relax.
still transcendental meditation that you do?
Yeah, still TM. Yeah, still do that. Yeah, it's a blessing.
I want to ask you about Bob Dylan. There's a legend.
Bob Dylan was great. We've right here in this studio is where we recorded. We did 52 songs.
Oh, Jesus.
We did 10 for the first album, 11 for the second album, and then 30 for the third album, Triplicate.
Amazing.
And I'll tell a little story about it. He was standing right here at the end of the night, the first night, and we did one song in the afternoon and one song in the evening. And I played him back. When he came in, he said, Al, my voice hasn't sounded this good in 40 years. So that was one good thing.
Yeah.
But he turned around after we played the things, and he was standing there, and I just went up and gave him a big hug, and he stiffened up.
Really?
And I thought, oh, shit, I shouldn't have done this. And then he looked at me, and I was just smiling. And then he broke out into a smile, and he kind of just high-fived and fist bumps from then on. And his manager said, Al, you're the only person he ever lets hug him.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So we got to be really close doing those. And I really got to like Bob a lot. You know, once you get by that thing that he's got.
Part. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really cool.
Is there anyone you haven't worked with? You have a bucket list of musicians or producers you'd like to work with?
I did. You know, I had the Sinatra and I had Paul McCartney, and all those things seemed to come about. I would like to do an album with Shadoe. There's something about her voice that just kills me. And I think I could make a great record with her. So I put it out there, and if it happens, great.
What about the current crop? Like, I particularly like Ariana Grande.
Oh, she's great.
She's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and I got to work with Michael Bublé. You know, really good singer. Michael is one of those few singers that will sit right in the middle of the band and sing like Frank.
Yeah.
Because he's that good, and he has that much confidence.
Yeah, he has that presence.
It's great when you can work with people like that.
No, let me ask you just one more question.
Sure.
What's the most important thing you've learned in life?
Wow, boy, that's a tough question. The most important thing I've learned in life. I think it's to treat other people as I would like to be treated. I think that's probably the most important thing. You know, treat everybody, whether he's the janitor or the top guy at the company, you know, with the same respect.
Yeah, when you are thinking about other people or being of service or just listening or paying attention to what they're saying or smiling or telling a joke at a particular moment, paying attention, you're not in yourself and beating yourself up, looking for the first thing that's wrong and then making a list. And going into that, I don't know if you have those downward spirals with all your success and busyness, but it's that chit-chat of the mind.
I went through, especially when I was drinking and doing drugs, I went through periods where I didn't know whether I was good enough or whatever, you know, and I lost confidence in myself.
But you generally seem to have a really positive attitude, which is, I think, my most important thing in life is attitude. If you can,
absolutely,
being optimistical. Victor Frankl called it tragic optimism.
No, I'm always one of those guys. The glass is half full, not half empty. You know, and I'm a positive guy, and I look at the bright side of everything now. You know, my life is good. I have no complaints. I don't know what the hell I could complain about. My health is good. I'm still working. I have a great family. I have 5 kids, 8 grandkids. They're all healthy and happy, and I get to see them all on Christmas Eve. They come over the house. So, and you look 25 years younger than you are, which is just annoying. I know, my doctor pisses my doctor off, too.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Well, you're a really amazing person, and I've really enjoyed this. I'm thrilled to be a part of your life in any way. You're really something.
Oh, that's great. When he told me you were going to do this, I thought, wow, how cool is that? Because I was, a producer at RCA doing the astronauts and all, and the biggest thing for us was to get a record played by Shadoe Stevens. My God. Shadoe's going to play our record. Holy shit.
Oh, God, that's so great.
I know, it was. It was wonderful.
Well, it's been quite a time. This has been a great day. Thank you.
Great.